everybody. Welcome to Redemption. You can go ahead and take a seat. My name is Casey Jordan, and it is an honor to be with you today. Corey Ball, our lead pastor, is out of town this weekend, and so I have the privilege of being with you today. If this is your first time here, let me just kind of introduce you to Redemption. Redemption began in January of 2020, so about 6 weeks before the world shut down due to the pandemic, and we went online for a season, and then got to come back in person a handful of years ago. And so next weekend, I just want to tell you this now, next weekend is our 5th anniversary. And so, yeah, you can cheer for that. That's great news. And it's incredible. We are going to be celebrating next Sunday together. And so I hope that you will be back here next Sunday. It's going to be a party. We're so looking forward to celebrating together. If you're here for the first time, I am confident that I am not the first person to welcome you. I hope you've already been welcomed, but can we just give it up for our first time guests? We're so glad that you're here. And we hope today that two things happened. First of all, we hope that you encounter the presence of God. The incredible thing about God is that you can encounter him anytime, anywhere. He's always there. He's always present. He's always with you. But we hope that you encounter him maybe in a different way today. We hope that you experience his love, his care, his welcome. We hope you experience that today. Second of all, we hope that you encounter the nicest people in St. Louis. Let me tell you guys, I work in a church in North Carolina. I've been around a lot of churches. And there's no place like this. Like, these are truly the nicest people in the world. And so we hope that you experience that today. We hope that you've experienced, again, that welcome, because you really are. Like, you were so welcome here. We're so glad that you're here. And so we hope you encounter the nicest people in St. Louis. So our purpose here at Redemption, our whole reason for existence, is to help the people of Kirkwood and the surrounding areas meet, know, and live for Jesus. That's our mission. That's what we want to do. And so I know there are a lot of people here at this church that have experienced that. They've met Jesus, they've come to know him better, they've learned how to live for him, and we hope that you experience that as well. So we're glad that you're here. So last weekend, Corey, again, our lead pastor, kicked off a series called How to Be a Good Fill in the Blank. And this is going to be a pretty long-term study that we're doing. Corey started off by talking about how to be a good follower of Jesus, because this is not a self-help series. Like, this series is not about, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and just trying to be better. That's not what this series is about. This starts with being a good follower of Jesus and then letting following Jesus impact every sphere of your life. And so that's what we're going to be going through over the next handful of weeks. And I have the privilege of continuing that series today. And today we're going to talk about how to be a good rester. How to be a good rester. Now, that might surprise you a little bit coming out of, the New Year's gate, because this is the time when we're making resolutions, right? This is the time when we're setting goals for our upcoming year. So just out of curiosity, by show of hands, how many of you set resolutions or set some sort of like goal for the upcoming year? Okay, that makes sense. Studies show that about 50% set resolutions. About 50% of people set resolutions. But here's what I've noticed about resolutions, and if you did a search on the most common resolutions for 2025, you'd notice this too. They're almost exclusively about productivity. They're about accomplishing or achieving something. There's usually a way to measure or track them. There's often an endpoint when you've reached that goal weight, when you've saved that amount of money, when you've gone that many days without indulging in a bad habit, or that many days of incorporating a good habit. They're almost entirely about productivity. We live in a culture that highly values productivity and output and achievement. And that can be a really good thing. It can be. In fact, if you look at the Bible, you'll notice that when God created the 7-day week, 6 of those days were dedicated to meaningful work. So productivity, work, can be a really good thing, a God-ordained thing. When done for the glory of God, it can be a holy endeavor. But I think sometimes we let that pendulum swing a little bit too far. Don't we? We let that pendulum swing a little bit too far, and by and large, we allow ourselves to believe that work is the most holy of endeavors. It's the most important thing. And again, it can be a really holy thing when done to the glory of God. But we've allowed productivity, we've allowed work so often to define us. It's where we find our identity. In fact, like when you meet someone for the first time, what's one of the first questions you ask? What do you do? What do you do? That we define ourselves that way. We define others that way. We identify ourselves that way. And again, don't get me wrong, work is a holy endeavor when done for the glory of God. But what if rest was also a holy endeavor? What if rest was also a holy endeavor? What if this year, even as you make your productivity-related resolutions, you also resolve to be a better rester, to get good at rest? One of the most ignored commands in the entire Bible is the command to Sabbath. The word Sabbath is the Hebrew word that means rest. And in the Bible, Sabbath is taking an entire day every single week and dedicating it to rest. Dedicating it to the Lord for the purpose of refreshing and renewing your heart and your soul and your spirits. That's what Sabbath is about. And again, one of the most ignored commands in the entire Bible. Now, there's a lot of debate among Christians regarding Sabbath. There are those that would argue that much like the sacrificial system in the Bible, Jesus fulfilled the Sabbath, and so we don't need to keep it anymore. He is where we find our ultimate rest, and so we don't need to honor the Sabbath. The problem is that's not biblical. There's no evidence in the Bible that the Sabbath was ever revoked or repealed. No indication. Jesus was accused by the Pharisees, this religious group of Jewish leaders, of breaking the Sabbath. And that's where a lot of Christians go, and they say, well, see, like the Pharisees accused Jesus of not keeping the Sabbath, so we don't need to keep it either. The problem is that Jesus did keep the Sabbath. He did. He honored it. He kept it faithfully every single week. What he didn't do is he didn't follow their man-made regulations around the Sabbath. All these rules that they had just kind of made up. He didn't subscribe to that. And so their accusation of Jesus for breaking the Sabbath was not a biblical accusation. It was that he wasn't keeping their man-made rules. But Jesus did, in fact, keep the Sabbath. And on one occasion, when Jesus was being accused by the Pharisees of breaking the Sabbath, he actually reiterated the need for the Sabbath and the heart of the Sabbath. Listen to what he said. Then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath." Let me say it again. The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of people, not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. Did you catch that? The Sabbath was made to meet our needs. The Sabbath is a gift to us and for us. It's intended to meet our God-given need for rest. That's what God made it for. There's no indication then that Jesus was revoking this command. He wasn't. He wasn't revoking it, but he was saying, but I'm not subscribing to all of your man-made rules. You're missing the heart of it. You put all of these rules in place where Sabbath is no longer restful. It's its own kind of work to uphold all of these regulations that you made up that aren't in the Bible. And that's what Jesus rejects. But he does not reject the Sabbath. So I'm going to take you to the two passages in the Old Testament that speak to the Sabbath. This is where we find these commands. But let's start where we always do at Redemption. If you have a physical Bible or a digital Bible, we always start in the table of contents. And the reason that we do that is because it helps us all just get on the same page and get to the same place. So if you have a Bible, again, either physically or digitally, you can go to the table of contents. And we're going to start in the book of Exodus. It's the second book of the Bible. We're going to be in chapter 20, verse 8. Exodus 20 is where we find the 10 commandments, and the Sabbath is actually the fourth of those 10 commandments. So let me read to you what it says. "Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and your daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day he rested. This is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy." So the reason that God gives here in this first passage for keeping the Sabbath is that in 7 days, or in 6 days, God created the heavens, the earth, everything in them, and on the seventh day he rested. The seventh day he set apart. The seventh day he called holy. So in other words, God built a rhythm of work and rest into creation. That's the rhythm that he built for us. On the seventh day, God ceased from his creative activity and rested. And so this is, in a sense, the first time God says, "It is finished." It is finished. So forgive the pithy quip here, but we're human beings, not human doings. We're human beings, not human doings. And that's what the Sabbath gets us to. That's the heart of the Sabbath. The Sabbath reminds us that we can stop doing and be valuable, dignified, worthy. We can cease from our work and rest and still be. And so in our culture that is so driven by productivity and results and output, I can't help but wonder if this is why we make the case against Sabbath, why we want to kind of grind against it, because we're used to being human doings, aren't we? We're used to identifying ourselves that way. We're used to defining ourselves that way. The idea of just being is terrifying when you're used to doing. When you're used to doing. Again, we have a lot of things to do. God dedicated 6 days of our week to meaningful, purposeful work. We're intended to make an impact on this world. Absolutely. But there's a day dedicated to rest. We're more than what we do. We're more than what we do. Before we look at the second reason given for a Sabbath, I want to point out something really important here. Yes, Sabbath is a gift from God. It's a gift from God. He built it into his rhythm of creation to meet our God-given need for rest. But I think sometimes when we think about Sabbath as a gift, we can insert sort of this idea that it's optional. It's a command. It is a gift, but it is also a command. We are instructed to keep Sabbath. And the reason that God had to command it is because we violated his creative rhythm. We failed to uphold the rhythms that he built into us. And so for our good, God commands it. It's not optional. It's not just a gift that we can take or leave. It's a command that we can obey or disobey. And so I think we need to hold those two things together, a gift to be received and a calling to be obeyed. That's what we find in Sabbath. It's a gift and it's a command. It's a false dichotomy to say it's one or the other. It's not, it's both. It's a gift and it's a command. So as we go through this, as we talk more about Sabbath, I want you to be honest with yourself. I want you to do like a little bit of a heart check today. Take a look at your priorities. Take a look at your heart. If you find yourself, thinking as we go, gosh, taking a day of rest sounds wonderful, but I can't. I can't do it. I just have too many other commitments. I'm going to challenge you a bit on that. I'm going to push you a little bit on that. What commitments do you have that are more important than your obedience? What commitments do you have that are more important than your obedience? Do the things that you're prioritizing over obedience deserve that place of priority? So be honest with yourself about that. Again, do a bit of a heart check. So I'm going to push us kind of hard on this because God put this in his top 10. This is in the 10 commandments, guys. He put it in his top 10. So maybe it's important. He put it right alongside do not murder and do not steal. This seems to matter to God. This seems to be important to him. So let's take it seriously. Let's take it seriously. But what a great command. What a great command. Guys, he's literally commanding us to take a day every single week to be with him and to do restful things. That's what this command is. This is a wonderful command. He's basically commanding us to have fun every week. Why do we not want to keep this command? Why do we make excuses for not keeping this command? This is an incredible command. What a good God to command this of his people. What a good God. This should be the easiest command to obey in the entire Bible. But I know it's not. And you know it's not. It's not. We're going to get really practical in just a little bit here about how to begin keeping a Sabbath. So if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by that, if you're sitting there thinking like, okay, that sounds great. I understand that it's a command. I understand it's something I'm supposed to obey, but how on earth do I do this? I can't find an hour for myself. How on earth do I take a day? We're going to talk about that. I promise. We're going to get really practical because again, it should be the easiest command to keep, and I also know that it's not. Again, and you know that it's not. If it was easy, all of us would be doing it because who doesn't want to keep this command? Who doesn't want to take a Sabbath every single week? All right, well, let's look at the second reason that God gives for Sabbath. So I gave you the first one from the book of Exodus, that God created the heavens and the earth and everything in them in 6 days, and on the seventh day, he ceased from his creative activity. So he built this rhythm into creation. 6 days of meaningful, purposeful, God-directed work, and then 1 day of God-directed rest. He built that in. But let's look at the second reason. The book of Deuteronomy, which is the fifth book of the Bible, so a couple books after Exodus, was written to the community of people. So let me back up on Exodus for a second. The book of Exodus was written to the community of people who had recently been set free from their slavery in Egypt. They ended up in the desert for about 40 years. Not going to get into that story. The book of Deuteronomy was written to their children. So this next generation, the generation that's going to enter into the promised land. And what Moses does, the author of both Exodus and Deuteronomy, what Moses does in the book of Deuteronomy is that he essentially, it's his last words to this community that's going to go into the promised land. It's right before he dies. And what he does in the book of Deuteronomy is he goes back through the 10 commandments, reiterates their importance. And again, when he gets to the fourth commandment, Sabbath, he reiterates that commandment, but he gives a different reason for keeping the Sabbath than he did in Exodus. So let me read that passage to you. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your house may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your ox, your donkeys, and other livestock, and any foreigners living among you. All of your male and female servants must rest as you do. Okay, so that sounds really familiar, right? That's pretty much a reiteration of what we read in Exodus. But here's what it says then. Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with his strong hand and powerful arm. This is why the Lord your God has commanded you to rest on the Sabbath day. Okay, so if all we had was the book of Exodus, he's given us reason enough to keep the Sabbath. He built it into creation. We were designed to operate this way. But here in the book of Deuteronomy, he gives us another reason. You were once slaves. Here's the thing. Slaves don't get a day off. Slaves don't rest. But those who have been set free, they get to rest. They get to rest. So God is declaring himself here to be a different kind of king than the pharaohs of Egypt that had enslaved his people for 400 years. He's setting himself apart from them. He's saying, look, I'm not a hard master. I'm not an unkind master. Good king that I want you to take a day off. I want you to rest. I want you to rest. That's the kind of king that I am. He wants the best for his people, and his best includes rest. Now, lest we be tempted to think that this doesn't apply to us because we weren't slaves in Egypt, right? He's not talking to us. The Bible tells us that we were slaves, maybe still are. Listen to what Paul says in the book of Romans. We know that our old sinful selves were crucified with Christ so that sin might lose its power in our lives. We are no longer slaves to sin. So Paul tells us that our slavery might not have been in Egypt, but we either were or still are in slavery to a greater tyrant than any of the pharaohs. And that tyrant is sin. We either were or still are enslaved. By the way, the Bible tells us that we're all in the same boat here. We're all in the same boat. When it comes to sin, when it comes to this slavery, all of us are in the same boat. All of us were or are slaves to sin. The difference between those who were slaves to sin and those who are slaves to sin is simple. Those who were slaves to sin are the ones who took God's way out through Jesus. They took him up on his deliverance, on his liberation from that slavery. That's the difference between those who were and are. And so if you've never taken him up on that, if I can say that as kindly as I know how, you're still in slavery. And again, we're all in the same boat. That's not a criticism of you. We're all there. We're all there. We all need this freedom. We all need this rescue. We all need this deliverance. And that's available to us through Jesus. But I digress on that. Back to the Sabbath. For those who are no longer slaves, for those who have been set free, Sabbath is a declaration of that freedom. It's a declaration of freedom. It's kind of rebellious if you think about it. This is who I am. I am free. I am free. I am no longer a slave to sin. I'm no longer a slave to the tyranny of productivity and output and results that my culture and maybe the people around me try to put on me. I am free, and Sabbath is my declaration of freedom. That's what Sabbath declares. That's what Sabbath declares. That My allegiance is to this good king who commands me to rest, who doesn't just invite me to rest or to offer rest, but loves me so much that he commands it of me. You are to rest. So, we've looked at this biblical command for rest, kind of the biblical basis for this command, that it was built into creation, that this is how we were designed to operate. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. We've also looked at the fact that it's a declaration of freedom. Those who have been set free, every time we Sabbath, we declare our freedom. That's what we get to do. But what is the purpose of Sabbath? What is the purpose? That's the basis, but what is the purpose of Sabbath? Sabbath is a spiritual practice. So not unlike reading your Bible or spending time in prayer, Sabbath is intended to spiritually form you. It's intended to do something within you, to shape you in such a way that it actually serves to help you love God and love others better. That's the purpose of Sabbath. That's what Sabbath is intended to do. And that's what sets Sabbath apart from an ordinary day off. It's not just a vacation day. It's not just taking PTO time. It's purposeful rest. It's purposeful rest. It's an opportunity for us to spend time with God, to experience his love, to enjoy his goodness. That's what Sabbath is about. So in short, Sabbath is to be a day of delight. One of my friends, Ryan, he refers to Sabbath as a yes day. Sabbath is a yes day. It's a yes to good things. It's a yes to joy. It's a yes to fun. It's a yes to delight. It's a day of delight where we delight in being with God, where we delight in being with the people that he's given to us, where we delight in the good things that he's given, delighting in good food and good naps and good fun. It's a day of delight. And if that delight is Godward focused, if we reflect on all of those things with gratitude and then allow it to shape our understanding of who God is, how good God is, well, it's going to invite us into a deeper love for God. It's going to form that in us. That's what Sabbath is intended to do. That's its purpose. And out of that love, out of that deepening love for God, will flow a deepening love for others. So Sabbath is a spiritual practice intended to spiritually form us. Again, it's different than a vacation day or just using some of your PTO time. It's a purposeful day of rest. So it's not just a day off. It's not just taking a break. It's meaningful and purposeful. So let's get really practical. What does it look like to take a Sabbath? How do we begin doing this? If we are to cease from our ordinary activity, which is what both Exodus and Deuteronomy said, cease from your ordinary work, well then what are we supposed to do on Sabbath? Real quick aside, I remember years ago, the first time I ever taught on Sabbath, probably about 10 years ago, there was a woman in the class that I was teaching, and we were starting to go through this, and she's like, honestly, like, it sounds boring. Like, I don't, what do I do? Do I just like draw the curtains and sit in a dark room and like do nothing all day? Like that doesn't sound restful. That sounds terrible. And I love that question because I was like, no, it's a ceasing from ordinary activity, but to be replaced with restful activity. So it's not a day of inactivity. It's a day of restful activity, different from your other 6 days. We're going to get more into this in a moment, but let's start with when to Sabbath. When to Sabbath? I don't believe that there is a God-ordained day that you must take a Sabbath. In the Old Testament, there was. In the Old Testament, it was Friday evening at sundown till Saturday evening at sundown. That was the rhythm of the Old Testament law. However, when you get to the New Testament, you see that Jesus' followers continued to keep a Sabbath, but they moved their Sabbath day to Sunday in remembrance of Jesus' resurrection on Sunday. That's when they moved it. So they continued to keep a Sabbath, but they seemed to feel the freedom to change the day. And so I think that, and they're never condemned for that. Like, that seems to be perfectly allowable for them. And so I think it should be for us as well. So I don't believe that there is a biblical day that, thou shalt Sabbath on this day. The Sabbath still holds, but I think the day can be flexible. So I'll talk more about my Sabbath here in a few minutes. I Sabbath from Friday night to Saturday night, not because of the Old Testament, because that's the day that I'm off work. I work at a church in, like I said, North Carolina, and so Sundays are a work day for me. So that's not really a day that I can Sabbath. I can come and worship, and I love getting to worship on Sundays, but most of the time I'm working. And so for me and for many of my friends, it's Friday night to Saturday night. So take a look at your schedule. What would work for you? Decide the day that works best for you. If you're married, talk to your spouse about it. See if you can find a day together. If you have kids, bring them into it. Invite them into this Sabbath practice as a family. But figure out the day that works best for you. So that's the first practical step. Decide when you're going to do it and then commit to it. Guard it. Protect that day. Here's the thing. When you commit to practicing Sabbath, when you commit to keeping a Sabbath, you are going to have 10,000 things vying for your attention that day. I promise you. So protect it, guard it. That's going to mean setting some boundaries. That's going to mean saying no to good things in order to say yes to better things. That's what it's going to mean. For me, here in St. Louis, where I live permanently, I'm the only one of my family that practices Sabbath when I do, Friday night to Saturday night. Other members of my family keep Sundays. Others, keep we're all kind of on different schedules. But everyone in my family knows that Friday night to Saturday night is my Sabbath. And that's really allowed to put some boundaries in place because they're aware that there are certain things that I will not be doing on Saturdays. There are certain things that I'm going to say no to. Even if y'all are going to do it, I'm saying no to that because that's not restful for me. This is my Sabbath. I'm protecting it. I'm guarding it. So be ready to set some boundaries. Be ready to say no to some things. Guard it. Commit to it. Keep it protected. Now, before we move on, I want to just say that I know that for a lot of us, a whole day feels just insurmountable. How on earth could I even possibly do that? That feels overwhelming. And I've heard a lot of Bible teachers, when they've taught on Sabbath, suggest starting with a morning or an afternoon, start with a part of a day and kind of work your way up to a full day. I don't think that's bad advice, and I'm not going to discourage you from doing that if that just seems, again, insurmountable, because doing something is better than doing nothing. So I'm not going to discourage you from that, but I do want to give a little bit of a caution to that and maybe challenge us a little bit here. The whole idea of Sabbath is that you enter into a prolonged time of rest. A prolonged time of rest. Biblically, a whole day. Biblically, a whole day. I've been practicing Sabbath for almost a decade now, and I bet I've only missed maybe 10 Sabbaths in the last 10 years. And usually when I miss a Sabbath, it's because I'm traveling internationally and I have less control over my schedule. That's been kind of the reason that I've missed Sabbaths before. And even after a decade of practicing Sabbath, here's what I've noticed for myself, and I suspect this would be true for many of you as well. Even after a decade of practicing, it still takes me hours to really settle in to rest. Because I've been running hard the last 6 days. I've been working the last 6 days. I've been doing stuff the last 6 days. And so for me, it can take a while into Sabbath where I actually feel settled into rest. Where I actually can feel like my heart and my mind slow down. And I actually begin to be refreshed and renewed by Sabbath. So the problem with doing a part of a day rather than a whole day is that you miss out on the best part of Sabbath. You miss out on the part where you've actually settled in, where you're actually getting to experience rest. The part where you really get to genuinely be unhurried. And so that's what I want to kind of caution you on. Again, doing something is better than doing nothing. But this is where a whole day is more valuable than 4 hours in the morning or 4 hours in the afternoon. Something else that I've found is that it's a lot easier to break a partial Sabbath than a whole day Sabbath. If I were to dedicate, let's say 8 a.m. to noon on Saturday, if something comes up, at 10, I can justify to myself, well, I'll just move my Sabbath to the afternoon. And I don't know about you guys though, once I've kind of started working on a day, it feels like the whole day is a wash. Well, I already did laundry this morning. I'm going to go ahead and, do my dishes now. It's actually harder for me to protect a small block of time than to say, this whole day is off limits. This whole day is off limits. And so I just want to encourage you to consider that. Think about that. But here's the challenge. What if Sabbath was the lens through which you made your decisions? What if Sabbath was the lens through which you made your decisions? What if Sabbath informed what you committed to? So instead of saying, oh man, we're going to do, fill in the blank on Saturdays, I guess we can't Sabbath. What if instead you said, we Sabbath on Saturdays, we can't do fill in the blank? What if Sabbath was that lens for you? And again, I'm using Saturdays because that's my day. Whatever you fill in the blank day for you. But what if it was the lens through which we made our decisions? I think that so often is the problem, is that we put everything ahead of Sabbath and then try to figure out how to fit Sabbath in, rather than committing to Sabbath and letting that inform the other decisions that we make. We prioritize other things ahead of it, and so it ends up by the wayside. It never happens. We never commit to it. We never prioritize it. So again, that's what I would challenge you to do. I would challenge you to think about your schedule, think about your commitments, think about your priorities. If Sabbath matters, and again, did I mention that this is a command from God? If Sabbath matters, then prioritize it. Prioritize it. Let it inform your other decisions, your other commitments, not the other way around. All right, so that's the first practical suggestion. Decide when you're going to Sabbath and then protect it, guard it. Second suggestion, decide what you will and won't do on Sabbath. Decide what you will and won't do on Sabbath. I recommend just taking a piece of paper, drawing a line down the middle, and on one side, these are the things I won't do. On the other side, these are the things I will do. Very simple exercise, honestly should be a super fun exercise for you. Let me give you an example. I do not do grocery shopping on Sabbath. I do not cook on Sabbath. I hate both of those things. They are like my least favorite, they're my least favorite adulting activities. Like, I have to do it, but I hate it. I hate it so much. And so I don't grocery shop, I don't cook on Sabbath. I have a really good friend, her name's Alex, and Alex loves to cook. Loves it. It's so restful for her. For her 40th birthday this year, all that she wanted was to bring friends over and cook a meal for them. It was wonderful. It was so good. And so during the week, she has 3 kids, and so during the week, she's really cooking for the masses. It's more like utilitarian. On Sabbath, though, her husband, Leonard, takes their 3 kids either to a park or out in the yard, and she spends hours preparing a meal on Saturday evenings for their family. And it's so restful for her. She loves it. So on my little piece of paper list, on the one side that says, what will you not do? I don't grocery shop or cook. For Alex, she's like, that's all I want to do on Sabbath, okay? So your list might be different than my list. I enjoy being outside. I enjoy doing yard work. So I will go out and do yard work on Sabbath. For some people, it's like, that is a chore. That is work. Not for me. I love it. I'm actually kind of sad. I have nothing to do right now because all we have is snow. But I love that. I look forward to the spring and the summer where I get to go out and do that. That's restful for me. That might not be restful for you. And so you think through, what is work for you? What is rest for you? Take time to think about it. Let me take us back to one of those passages about Sabbath. In the book of Exodus, it says, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. So the Sabbath, yes, was made for man. It was made to provide us with the rest that we so desperately need. It is a gift and a command. But it's also a day dedicated to the Lord. Again, that's what sets it apart from a vacation day or just another day off. It's a day dedicated to the Lord. It's uniquely for the Lord. So on my Sabbath, personally, I spend extended time with God. Extended time beyond kind of what my normal kind of morning time with him is like. So reading the Bible, prayer. I have a book going all the time that I only read on Sabbath. I'll read a couple of chapters and then think about those chapters throughout the coming week. But that book is for Sabbath. Right now I'm reading with a friend of mine, The Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis. So she and I are going through that together. We have a plan in about a month to get together and talk about it. But I only read it on Sabbath. That's the day for that book. That said, I don't spend my entire Sabbath day just reading and thinking and praying. I spend extended time doing that, but that's not all that I do on Sabbath. I like to sleep in. I'm not a morning person. I do not like mornings. I have never liked mornings. And so on Sabbath, I don't set an alarm. I have the option to do that because I do not have children coming to wake me up at 6. But that's something I do on Sabbath is I don't set an alarm. I just let my body sleep as long as it wants to sleep. And sometimes I take a nap in the afternoon. I did that yesterday, and it was wonderful. I loved it. I've been talking with my oldest niece, Annie. Annie's 7. And I've been teaching her lately about Sabbath. I'm trying to teach my nieces and nephews about this. And so Annie lives next door to me. And so in the last handful of months as she's been learning about Sabbath, she's gotten into the habit of either riding her bike down or walking down to my house. And we do Sabbath Legos. We have Lego sets. She has her set, I have my set. And she comes down on Sabbath and we do Legos together. And we talk about Sabbath. We talk about this past week. We talk about the things that we're grateful for. And so we just enjoy each other's company for an hour and a half. And then she goes on home. I like to play my piano. I like to read books. I like to spend time on a hobby. I like to be with people that I love on Sabbath. So what is restful for you? Again, this should be a fun exercise. What are the things that you don't want to do on Sabbath? What is work for you? What would it look like to eliminate those things from your Sabbath day? What are the things that are restful? Like, imagine this, guys, for just a second. Imagine this. You get to choose every single week an entire day of things that are restful for you. What a good commandment this is. This should be such a fun practice. This should be such a fun exercise. But again, Sabbath is what is known as a spiritual practice, which means you practice it. You get better at it over time. And so what you do on your very first Sabbath may not be what you do a year from now. Again, I've been doing this for about 10 years. And my Sabbath looks very different now than it did 10 years ago because I'm learning. I'm constantly refining it. You know, things that I thought were going to be restful turned out not to be. Things that I thought felt like work actually turned out to be really restful for me. So practice it. Be willing to refine it. If something didn't work this week, try something else next week. It's a practice. It's something that we get better at over time. But again, this should be fun. This should be fun. Imagine getting to dream up what it would look like to spend an entire day every week doing things that you love. Spending time with the Lord, spending time with the people that you love, doing things that you love. This should be fun. This should be fun. All right, let me give you a third practical suggestion. Prepare for Sabbath. Prepare. Once you've decided what you will and won't do, think about what you need to get done the day or two beforehand so that you can dedicate the day to those things. So as I mentioned, I don't grocery shop or cook on Sabbath. Friday evening to Saturday evening, I don't do that. That means that usually Tuesday or Wednesday, I have to figure out, okay, what do I need to get from the store on Thursday or Friday afternoon? What do I need to get prepared so that I can actually keep to my Sabbath? I have to start a couple of days in advance. If you're not going to do laundry on your Sabbath, make sure you have it done a day or two before so that everyone has clean underwear. You don't want to run into that problem on Sabbath, right? So figure out what you need to do to prepare for the things that you're going to eliminate, what needs to get done, but then also prepare for the things that you want to do. If you want to spend time reading a book, make sure you've got a book on hand. If you want to spend time working on a puzzle, make sure you have a puzzle ready to go. If you want to spend time crocheting, go to the store and make sure you have yarn. What do you need to prepare, not only to eliminate things, but to incorporate things? Spend time preparing for your Sabbath. When it comes to spending time with God, know what you're going to read, so you're not just flipping around in your Bible. This is what I'm going to spend time in today. This is the book I'm going to spend time in. This is the passage I'm going to spend time in. Have a plan. Be prepared. This was a mistake that, honestly, I made very early on when I started Sabbathing. I didn't prepare. I didn't know to prepare. And so I would get to my Sabbath day, and I would have nothing to eat, nothing to do. What am I supposed to do? I didn't prepare for this. I wasn't ready. And so preparing a couple of days in advance will make a world of difference to keeping a Sabbath. All right, let me give you one more suggestion. Sabbath with others. Sabbath with others. I have 4 friends that I Sabbath with. And we are not usually physically together because they live in North Carolina and I live here. I'm in North Carolina about a week every single month, and so I get to spend a Sabbath with them every month, but usually we're not together. But let me tell you, Sabbathing with others has been an absolute game changer. Years ago, we all decided that we were going to commit to this together. We were going to do it together. I can't tell you how Sabbathing with others has impacted my practice of Sabbath. Now, all of us work at this church together in North Carolina, and so we all have the same schedule. So for all of us, it's Friday night to Saturday night. That's our day off, and so for all of us, we're on the same page. But even if we weren't, even if we all had different schedules, just knowing that other people are doing this with me has changed everything for me. I get a text message from at least one of them almost every Thursday or Friday asking how my Sabbath preparation is going. Like, hey, have you done your grocery shopping? Have you prepared your food? Are you going to be able to eat tomorrow? Have you done your laundry? Like, how, what have you need to do this week to prepare? Do you have the book that you're going to read? Do you have the puzzle you're going to do, or the Lego set for your niece? Like, what are you ready? Are you ready for Sabbath? I get that text message every Thursday or Friday from at least one of them. Again, because we all work together, if they get a work email from me on Saturday, I will get a text message on Sunday morning when they see it, because they haven't been checking their email, asking what I was doing on my computer on Sabbath. Why were you sending work emails on Saturday? You're supposed to be resting. Almost every Sunday afternoon or Monday, I'll get a text message again from one of them. How was Sabbath? What did you do? I talk more about Sabbath with those couple of friends than anybody else in my life because we're all doing it together. There's this built-in accountability to it. And it's been an absolute game changer for us. We've also learned from each other. As we've practiced Sabbath. We all Sabbath a little bit differently. We all have different things kind of on our lists of what we will and won't do. We all enter into Sabbath a little bit differently. I have one friend who every Friday night she goes on a walk with her family, and that kind of marks the start of Sabbath for them. I have another friend who, her and her family, they on Friday nights either do a game night or a movie night, and that kind of enters them into Sabbath. My favorite, though, is what my friend Alexis and her family do. Their house on Friday nights is my favorite place in the world to be. Absolute favorite. I try to get to Charlotte for Friday nights because I want to be part of Sabbath with them. Their tradition, their way of entering into Sabbath, is that they have a tablecloth. They have 4 kids. They have a tablecloth that only comes out on Sabbath. They put a tablecloth down. They have candles that they light, Sabbath candles that they light. We either have prepared dinner on Friday afternoon and we have a kind of a homemade meal, or we order out, usually sushi. That's kind of our tradition. And over the course of this kind of slow meal, her husband prays a prayer over the family, and then everyone takes turns blessing someone else in the family. It's so beautiful. So last time I was there for Sabbath, my friend's husband, Ryan, who I mentioned earlier, he blessed their 9-year-old son for helping his sister with her homework that week, and just honored him for having such a servant's heart and for being willing to give up some of his playtime to help her. I had an opportunity to bless their 5-year-old daughter, Campbell, who's just joy embodied. And I got to bless Campbell and just say, like, you just light up the room when you walk in, and like you just bring so much joy to my life. Like, I look forward to seeing you every single time I'm in town. I hope you always have that joy. And so we just all go around and everyone gets blessed, and everyone blesses someone else. It is the most just beautiful evening, the most beautiful way to transition into this time. Lately, these friends and I, who I do Sabbath with, we've been talking about how to transition out of Sabbath so it doesn't feel so jarring. Because what can happen for us, and maybe for you, is that Sabbath ends at dinner time on Saturday. It's like, okay, got to get the grocery list going. I got to place my order so we can pick up tomorrow. Okay, homeschooling's coming up, so I need to make the list of who's doing what this week, and it can just feel very jarring. So like lately, again, this is a practice. We're all still learning. We're refining kind of how we transition out, so it doesn't feel quite so abrupt and quite so jarring. Sabbath with others. The accountability will impact you. The learning together will impact you. Do it together. Even if you're not physically together, do it with other people. Invite someone else in. I mean, start with your family, start with your spouse, start with your kids. Invite them into this. Figure out what that's going to look like together. But then ask some friends, hey, what if we did this together? Again, even if it's not the same day, that's fine. But do it together. Sabbath is a practice, and we're all practicing together. But Sabbath is not an end in and of itself. Remember, the purpose of any spiritual practice is to spiritually form us. It's meant to change us. It's meant to deepen our love for God as we position ourselves before Him, as we position ourselves to experience more of His love, more of His provision, more of His heart and His character. That's what Sabbath is intended to do. And out of that overflow, it is to deepen our love for others. On the rare occasion that I do miss a Sabbath, it affects me. It affects me. Thanks to a good bit of socialization, you might not know how that's affecting me, but I can feel it affecting my contentment. I can feel it affecting my patience. I can feel it affecting my heart. The thing is that I went years without practicing the Sabbath, and so I never had anything to compare it to. I didn't know that not keeping the Sabbath was affecting me until I started doing it. And then I realized how much it was affecting me. It's the day that I look most forward to every single week. And not because I'm not working. I love to work. I love my job. I love what I get to do. I love the things that God has entrusted to me as work. I love work. But I look so forward to this day because nothing compares to the joy of Sabbath. Nothing compares to the joy of Sabbath. Here's the thing. There is a cost to Sabbath. There is. Sabbath is not without sacrifice. It might mean that you need to make hard decisions about your schedule. It might mean that you need to reorient how you spend your time and what you spend it doing. It might mean that you need to say no to good things in order to say yes to better things. There's a cost to Sabbath. But there's also a cost to not Sabbathing. There's a cost to your relationship with God. Remember, Sabbath is a gift and a command. It's gratitude and it's obedience. So there's a cost to our relationship with God when we don't honor the way that he designed us to operate. There's a cost to your relationship with others, your ability to love others. Hurry, says John Mark Comer, is incompatible with love. We cannot be a hurried people and love others. And so what Sabbath does is Sabbath resets us. Sabbath slows us down. Sabbath breaks us from the hurry. Sabbath makes room in our lives to love other people well, not just on Sabbath, but it should set the tone for the other 6 days. The rest that we experience on Sabbath ought to overflow into the other 6 days. Even as we engage in meaningful work, it makes us a less hurried people. And there's also a cost to your own heart and soul. You weren't created for endless productivity. You weren't designed that way. You weren't meant for that. You weren't made to do everything. That's just contrary to how God designed you, how God created you. And so Sabbath serves to realign you to that design. It brings you back to how you were made, what you were made for. So there's a cost to Sabbath. I'm not gonna pretend that there's not, but there's a cost to not Sabbathing too. So what if this year, alongside all of your productivity-related resolutions, what if you resolved to rest? What if you resolved to rest? I once heard a Bible teacher say this about Sabbath. He says that we don't rest from our work, we work out of our rest. So what if rest took priority for you this year? What if you resolved to Sabbath? What if you committed to dedicating a day to the Lord every single week and trusted that he knew what he was doing when he built this into creation? What if you took a day every single week to declare your freedom? That you are free from sin. You are free from your identity being in anything and anyone other than the Lord who made you. What if you resolved to do that this year? What if that changed things more than your productivity-related goals and resolutions? Again, keep them. There's 6 days dedicated to work. Work is good. Work is holy when dedicated to the Lord, when done for his glory. But so is rest. So I hope you will. Sabbath is a day of delight. It's a yes day. It's a day of yes to good things, to time with God, to time with people that you love, to time with things that refresh you and renew you. And who of us doesn't need that? I haven't met very many people over the course of my life who are like, man, I just rest too much. I've never felt that way. Who among us doesn't need that? Who among us doesn't need to be refreshed and renewed? And why would we not say yes to God when he says, I want to give that to you every week, every single week. I want that for you. I want that for you. The Sabbath is a day created to meet the needs of his people.